Hello, welcome back to our Sacred Civic Action Voter Empowerment Intensive. Today we are going to be discussing voter readiness and civic participation. That is session 3 of our part 3 series. So, just to give a little recap, if you are new to the Sacred Civic Action Voter Empowerment Intensive, and if you missed sessions 1 and session 2. So, I'm going to give a little recap of what we discussed in session 1 and session 2. So, session 1 of the Voter Empowerment Intensive, we talked about foundations of faith, freedom, and democracy. And just to give a little background on that, and just to kind of give you an idea of what Sacred Civic Action is, what it's all about. So, Sacred Civic Action, which is the name of my civic participation arm of the ministry that God has blessed me to serve, glowing in grace. And so there is what we call Sacred Civic Action, which is the civic engagement, civic participation arm of the ministry. And so Sacred Civic Action, it is, I would say, rooted in faith, community, and service, stewardship. It's not really about politics. So to say is more about spiritual stewardship. So with Sacred Civic Action, we have that opportunity to discover our role, our influence, and just use our voice to make a difference in the world around us. So, that's what Sacred Civic Action is all about. It is about faith first and foremost, because that's the foundation of the ministry. That's the foundation of, where my service comes from. And so that's what we kind of talked about, those foundations in session 1 of the Voter Empowerment Intensive. And because it's all about our care and how we use that and how we express our love for God first and foremost and for others. So just caring for one another, caring for the community, and how we express that love through our service, how we express that love and how we show up in our community. So that's what Sacred Civic Action is all about. We also talked about in the first session why civic engagement matters, why our voice matters, and how voting shapes our communities, how policies impact our daily life, and whether you realize it or not. The policies that are already law, policies that are being, that's becoming a law, all those policies, all that impacts our daily life and whether we realize it or not. So we might not even realize why it's so important that we do vote while we exercise our right to vote. So sometimes that may not always be clear. And that's the purpose of this voter empowerment intensive, that just kind of share some information to make sure that you will become an informed and engaged citizen. In session 1, we also talked about the political parties in Louisiana because it was more focused on Louisiana. Our voter empowerment intensive, because that's where I'm at in Louisiana. So in Louisiana, we have a new party system for our election. So what we used to have was called an open primary election, but now we have closed primaries. With the open primary was considered, people refer to it as the jungle primary, where we can just vote for any candidate that we wanted, regardless of how we were registered to vote, whether we were a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. We can vote for any candidate we wanted that was on the ballot. Now with the closed primaries, it's a little different. We have to select, if we're a registered Democrat. I was about to share, like if you're a no party voter, which Louisiana now only recognizes 3 political parties, which are Republican, Democrat, and no party. So if you're a Democrat, then the only options you have when you go to vote is those Democrat candidates. And if you're a Republican, you have to vote for a Republican candidate. Whereas if you're a no party voter, then you have to select either or. And if you don't make a selection, and because we just explored just really implemented this closed primary election in our past primary election that we had in Louisiana just a few weeks ago. So if you're a no party voter and you choose to not select the Democrat or Republican ballot, then some of those elected offices, some of those candidates that may be running, you may not have an opportunity to vote at all because you didn't select Democrat or Republican. So you have that option. So from what I hear, it was a little confusing when we first rolled this out, which was a few weeks ago when we had those no party voters that wasn't really sure how the process worked. And there were even workers at the polls that really didn't know because it is new and there was a bit of confusion. And we don't want that. And that's the purpose of this voter empowerment intensive because we don't want you to be confused when you go to the polls to vote. We want you to know exactly what's on the ballot. We want you to be informed. We want you to have a plan to vote, not just say that you're going to vote, but actually have a plan to vote, okay? And so we also talked about in session one the fight for voting rights and the civil rights movement and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and how voting was not always accessible to everyone. You know, right now we all have a right to vote, unless, you know, that right was taken away from us if we become incarcerated or you know, something to that nature. But that right, we didn't always have access to that right. There was a lot of barriers to voting, such as poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation at the polls, you know, and that's still going on today. A lot of those barriers that, you know, those had to face back then coming up, you know, during the civil rights period and the time when the Voting Rights Act was signed into law. You know, a lot of those barriers we're still having to deal with today, and it's sad to say and it's sad to see it, but that's why it's so important that we make this a priority. That's why it's so important that we make voting a part of our lives. And it's not something that we just think about when it's time to go to the polls and vote. It's something that's engraved in our minds and hearts. And we understand how important it is that it becomes a part of who we are. Okay. So that was a little bit about session one, which was Foundations of Faith, Freedom, and Democracy. And so now I'm just giving a brief recap because this is a three-part series. So just giving a recap of session one and session two before we dive into session three, which is the final session of the Voter Empowerment Intensive. So session two, we talked about understanding today's voting landscape. Again, we talked about in Louisiana, the open primary and the closed primaries. I kind of touched on that a little bit, but we kind of touched on that again in session two. We talked about protecting your voter registration. It's so important that we protect our voter registration because just because we're registered to vote, that does not mean that, you know, something can happen to where you become an inactive voter and you may not even realize it. That's why it's so important that we vote in every election and that we are making sure that we are protecting our voter registration, and we can do that by just going to check on a regular basis and not just wait until it's time to go to vote. Not wait until it's election time. Just make sure you're checking on a regular basis. In Louisiana, we have the Louisiana Go Vote app. You can download the app and you can be able to check that on that app, or you can just go to the Louisiana Secretary of State's website, and all that information is there. Information about voting, elections, the candidates, you know, everything you need to prepare yourself to be an informed citizen, to be an informed voter is on that website. So just make sure you're checking your voter registration, making sure, you know, if you move, you have any address changes, all that can impact your active voter registration. If you move and, you know, they can't confirm what your address is, that can, you know, cause you to become an inactive voter. And you don't want that. Make sure you're confirming your party affiliation. You know, some of you may be Republican, may want to switch to Democrat. You may be Democrat, may want to switch to no party or vice versa. So just make sure that your party affiliation is updated. And you want to make sure, again, voting consistently, because if you're not voting in every election, that is a reason to have your name purged from the voter rolls and you can become an inactive voter. And sometimes you may not even realize until you go to vote, say you didn't vote in the last 3 or 4 elections, and then this is the election that you think is important, more important than all the other ones, which all of them are important, especially these local elections. We need to make sure that we're showing up. But for instance, you go to vote and you hadn't voted in the previous few elections, and then your name is not on the voter rolls. And that can be the reason because you have not voted consistently. So we also talked about redistricting and gerrymandering. That is something that we're having to deal with, unfortunately, not only here in Louisiana, but across the entire country. We're seeing, um, you know, redistricting and gerrymandering is happening all across this country, and a lot of it is happening illegally, because we're not supposed to be redistricting and drawing lines in the middle of a decade. That is only done once every 10 years, once the census is done. So, it's important that we know all this information, that we know how political power works, that we know how representation impact all of us. And when we don't have fair representation, how that can dilute the power that we do have, how our vote is diluted. So we have to make sure that we are paying attention, and we have to know that it doesn't just stop. It doesn't stop with voting. Like, that's part of the process, but it's not where it ends. And so we're going to get into that today in session 3 about voter readiness and civic participation, which is my favorite part, which all of them, um, I love to teach this. I love to talk about how civic participation, how important it is, how, we have to all be engaged in this process. But just talking about voter readiness and civic participation, it is something that I really love to share on, really love to, just help others to be informed, to be engaged, because we all have to be involved in this process. Okay, it can't be done by one person, can't be done by one group of people. Everybody has to be involved in this process. So we're going to get on into it. Session 3, which is civic participation, voter readiness and civic participation. Okay. And so, why preparation matters, you may ask. Civic participation doesn't begin on election day. So we're right now in the middle of the midterm elections, not only here in our state, in the state of Louisiana, but midterms. We're voting for the midterms for congresspersons. We're voting for mayors. We're having local elections. We're having state elections all across the country. So election season is in full swing right now. And being prepared, it matters. It makes a difference that we are prepared. Civic participation, again, it doesn't begin on election day. It doesn't begin the day before election day. We have to be prepared for every single election. We have to have a plan. We have to know exactly how this process works. And we may not know everything. We may not know everything, and that's okay. But try to be informed as best as you can. Preparation builds confidence. Once we are prepared, that helps us to be more confident. That gives us a little more courage to do what we need to do, to not only be prepared for ourselves and make sure that we're informed and educated, but we will have the confidence to inform and educate others when we are prepared. And that's just in anything you do. Preparation builds confidence. When you are prepared for whatever it is that you can do, and you may be fearful, it may be a challenge for you, but when you have that confidence, when you have that preparation, you will have the confidence that you need to pull it off, whatever it is. So informed citizens make informed decisions. Let me repeat that. When we are informed, we make informed decisions. We can't make informed decisions when we don't know ourselves. When we haven't informed ourselves or been informed with the information that we need, it's going to be hard to make those decisions. Planning reduces barriers to participation. Once we have a plan, and we're going to talk about that, making sure that you have a voting plan. But when you have a plan, that reduces barriers to participation, because you may not, say for instance, you may not have transportation, but if you make a plan, be able to arrange that transportation in advance to, however it is, if you're going to, ride with somebody to the polls, whether you're going to take a ride share to the polls, whether you're going to take the transit, local transit, the bus to the polls, however it is, but planning in advance reduces the barriers. You already have the plan. You already know how you're going to cast your vote. And even though it only takes a few minutes once you get to the polls, depending on how many people are there, that planning, make sure you take into consideration making that plan so you can know exactly how you are going to vote, how you're going to cast that vote, because it's so important. Civic engagement extends beyond voting. After we vote, there's other things that we have to do as well. We have to make sure that we stay engaged. We have to make sure that we stay involved. We have to make sure that we volunteering for causes that we care about. We have to make sure that we are connecting with our elected officials, those that we are voting for, putting in office. We have to make sure that we are connecting with them on a regular basis. We don't just vote and send people um, to Congress or to our local elections, just send them to office, and then there's we end the process right there. No, we have to make sure that we stay engaged. We have to make sure that we do not just distance ourselves after the election's over with, after we vote. That's not how that works. We have to make sure that we're doing our part, making sure that we're staying engaged, making sure we're being educated. Okay. So the voter readiness checklist, make sure you have that voter readiness checklist before election day. Make sure you verify your voter registration. We kind of talked about that. Making sure you're going online. If you're in Louisiana, go to the Secretaries of State website. You can use the Go Vote app to make sure your voter registration is active. You don't want to get to the polls and then they tell you that your name is not on the voter rolls, that you have been purged from the voter rolls. You don't want that to happen. Confirm your polling location. Polling locations change all the time, especially if you are in one of these southern states. They play all kinds of games. There's all type of voter intimidation. There's all type of just shady things that happens. You may have had a polling location that was open last year for election. This year that polling place is no longer somewhere where you can go and vote. So just make sure, and all that information is public information. You can find that information on the Secretaries of State website. Make sure that your location is where you're supposed to go, because early voting locations are different from election day locations. So on election day, you will go to the polling place that's in your district where you live. It'll be somewhere in your neighborhood where you live. Whereas early voting locations, there's a few locations across the city where you would go. So make sure you confirm that. Review voting options. Make sure, weigh your options, know what it is that's on the ballot. Make sure you know how many candidates on the ballot. Make sure you know if there are any ballot measures that's on the ballot, any amendments, constitution amendments. Just make sure you know what your options are when you're going to vote. Learn election dates. Make sure you know when early voting is. Anybody can vote early. You don't have to have a specific reason to vote. Anybody can vote early. Make sure you know when those early vote dates is. Make sure you know when election day is. If you're gonna vote by mail, make sure you know the deadline to get those ballots mailed back to your registrar's office before the deadline. So make sure you have all those dates. Make a voting plan. I cannot express this enough. Make a voting plan. Know exactly how you're going to vote, if you're going to vote early or if you're going to vote on election day, if you're going to vote by mail or if you're going to go into the polling place in person. Just have a plan to know how you're going to do that. Are you going to ride with a friend or are you going to go by yourself? Just have a plan to know how you're going to do that. Is there something going on election day where you may not be able to go? Is there, event that you may be attending that you can't go on election day? Make sure you plan to vote early. So take all that into consideration when you are making your plan to vote, okay? Understanding your ballot. Know before you vote. Research the candidates, make sure you know who the candidates are that's on the ballot. Read ballot measures carefully. Understand local offices. Review information from reliable resources. Sometimes you get information out there that may not be from a reliable source. Make sure you understand all that. Understand what's on your ballot. Research those candidates. A lot of them, they either have social media pages, they have websites that you can go to learn their platform, to learn what it is that they are running for, what they support, what they are against. You can find out all the information. Just follow their social media platforms, and most of them normally do have a social media page, and you can just kind of check them out and see what it is that they running on what their platform is, and you can find out information from them that way. Participate, attend those rallies that they have. Some of the candidates, they have debates, they have rallies that they go to and they speak to the community. Try to find out. They normally will announce those dates and locations on their social media, or it might be on their website, but you can pretty much find out, information that you need to make an informed decision if this is someone you want to support or if it's someone that you don't want to support. Okay, make sure you read those ballot measures carefully. In Louisiana, we have some constitutional amendments that be on the ballot, and oh my goodness, it's a lot of information to read. But just make sure you're understanding what it is that you vote for or what you are voting against. Just make sure that you're being informed. So making your voting plan. A prepared voter is an empowered voter, okay? So these are some questions to consider when you're making your voting plan. When will I vote? Again, I talked about, early voting versus election day voting. If you think you may not be able to vote on election day because of an event, you may have to work, whatever the situation may be, make sure that you know that you have a plan to vote early. How will you get there? If you don't have transportation, are you gonna, go with a friend? Are you gonna take a Uber or Lyft? Are you gonna ride the bus? Just have a plan. When you are prepared, you can have a better chance at making sure your vote is cast on, whether it's on election day or early voting. But just have a plan so you know that your votes get counted, that you can get that vote in and that it can get counted. What identification is required? We know we need ID cards to vote in Louisiana, whether it's a passport or uh, ID, a driver's license, but just some type of identification, photo identification when you go and vote. What challenges should I plan for? If there's anything that you can think of that may be a challenge for you, if you are maybe disabled, you may not be able to stand in the line. There's normal accommodations for those that have disability challenges that may can't wait in the line. They normally accommodate those, but just any type of challenges that you may have to come up against, just make sure that you are preparing for that, okay? And civic participation beyond voting. So as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't end with going to the polls and vote. We have to do our part beyond voting after we go and cast our ballot. So ways to engage all year round. All year round. You don't just do this on election day, go and vote, and then just go on about your day, go on about your business for the rest of the year. We can attend public meetings. We have, especially for on the local level, we have school board meetings, we have city council meetings. When the legislative sessions are in session, you can go to those meetings, go to those hearings. We just wrapped up our 2026 legislative session in Louisiana. It was a very, very active session. We had a lot going on. A lot of bills were passed. A lot of bills were not passed. There was, a whole lot going on with redistricting, with, the Supreme Court decision this year. The Supreme Court decided to side with, really on the side of dismantling the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So we saw where in Louisiana, we have 6 congressional districts. 2 of those districts are what they call opportunity districts, which are majority minority districts, and one of those districts have been eliminated based on that Supreme Court ruling that came down just a few months ago. So we had a very, very active legislative session here in Louisiana. There's still a lot of work to do. We have to get to work because there is so much at stake. Again, I mentioned earlier, what happens with these policies, it affects our daily life. And whether we realize it or not, whether we realize how important voting is, how we whether we realize how important it is for us to show up and to attend these public meetings is very important because it makes a difference when we show up, when we contact our elected officials, when we volunteer for causes we care about in our community, when we stay informed about local issues, not just about state. We should be informed about state issues, federal issues on a federal level, but also about those local issues because that is what gonna impact us the most. Those local issues, those municipal and local issues that are impacting us, we have to make sure that we know what's going on. Serve on boards and commissions. There's always opportunities to serve on a board, to serve on a commission. So, do that. Just explore different ways that you can stay engaged year round. Okay. And so being a responsible consumer of information, this is so important with so much information out there floating on the internet, especially when it comes to election season. There's all kind of information that is out there floating around. We want to make sure that we are being responsible with the information that we are consuming. So these are some questions you want to ask. Is the source credible? Is the information current? Is it factual or is it an opinion? There's a difference between fact and opinion. A lot of people don't know the difference. Okay. There is a difference between fact and opinion. So make sure you are asking those questions. Can this information be verified? Like if you come across some information online and that information is only coming from one source, you can't go and verify that information anywhere else. It's likely it's not real information. It's not real news. It's not a credible source. And you may just need to dismiss that information because normally, if something is factual, then you can go and find it from multiple sources. So, a lot of times you'll see stuff pop up online on social media and it's just absurd. It's just crazy stuff. And then you're looking like, is this really real? And a lot of times, if you have to question it if it's real or not, is probably fake news, is probably not real. So just make sure that you are evaluating that information, okay? Especially in the day of AI, artificial intelligence, there's all kind of stuff that pops up and it can really look real. You can see people in these videos that and this it can look real. The stuff that you see online today with AI, it can really look real and you can really, be deceived with the information that's floating around out there. So just make sure that you are evaluating that information. Civic leadership starts where you are. May I add any more? It starts with you. It starts right where you are. You don't have to go across the world. You don't have to go across the country. Your civic leadership starts right where you are with you, okay? Everyday leadership matters. So we must lead with integrity, listen respectfully, stay informed, encourage constructive dialogue, model civic responsibility. So all these are ways that we can model our leadership because it does matter. And all of us are leaders in our own way, whether we are leading our homes, whether we are leading in our workplace, whether we are leading in ministry, whether we're leading in our civic participation. Whatever way we're leading in our own way, just know that there are people that are watching us. There are people that are learning from us. So we have to lead by example, okay? And we have to, do it in these different ways. And then staying informed, that's so important. I like to stress how important it is because when we are prepared, that gives us the confidence to be able to share information, to teach information, to just, share information with others. But we have to be prepared to do that. You can't just be on a whim and just sharing information that hasn't been verified, that may or may not have come from a credible source. So we have to do our homework. We have to do the research. We have to do our due diligence before we are, contributing to sharing fake news out here. And there's already so much information that's out here floating around that just is not factual. So we have to do our due diligence in making sure that we are contributing to the good information and the factual information that is out here. Okay. So your civic commitment, reflect. I want you to reflect on this. This is a reflection question I have for you. What is one action you would take in the next 30 days to become a more informed and engaged citizen. So what is something that you can do in the next 30 days? Um, Again, we shared ways that you can be involved, you can be engaged, attend a public meeting. You know, right now we are in full blown election season between now and November for the midterm elections. Go and attend a public meeting or a rally for one of the candidates that you may be considering supporting. You may not really know a whole lot about them, but if you see that there's a rally that they're hosting, whether it's in person or virtual, attend that rally and try to find out about this candidate, see where it is that they're staying, what positions they take, what it is that they are opposed to, and then you'll be able to make an informed decision on if this is someone you want to support or if this is someone that you just may not want to support. So just take one action, because I'm all about action. Those action ways, I'm all about being able to take action and just explore ways that we can be involved and be engaged. Okay. All right. So this is my call to action that I end with on all of my um, presentations, on whether I'm doing this in person or whether I'm doing it virtual. But I do have a call to action because I always have to end with a call to action. So my call to action for you today is to stay informed, stay involved, learn, question, and participate. Always ask questions, especially if you're not familiar with something and you don't know. Ask those questions, participate, be involved, be engaged, and share with someone what you learned. Whatever you learned in this presentation today, share it with somebody else. If it was something you may have already known, whatever it may be, just share that information so others can become aware of this information and they can be an informed voter as well. So I have my book here that I wrote, Sacred Civic Action, Quick Guide to Engaging in Civic Life. So I just like to share with you this resource that I have, and you can order this book on Amazon, and start your journey from intention to influence. So we want you to be intentional. Yes, we do. But we also want you to be influential as well, because again, I shared that Sacred Civic Action is rooted in faith, service, and community and stewardship. So we have an obligation to be able to make sure that we are being educated, we are being informed, and then sharing that information out with others, because it's about discovering who we are in this process. And again, we need all hands on deck. We need everyone to be involved in this process in order to make it work, okay? And right now, we are in some times where we all have to really be paying attention and know what's going on, because if we're not, that's when things are going to slide right underneath our noses. We're not going to know what happened. We have to make sure that we are paying attention. We have to make sure that we are being engaged. Okay. All righty. So that's all I have for today for our voter empowerment intensive. And again, this is session 3 of the 3-part series. So if you have not, in the other 3 parts, they were done on video as well. You can find those on YouTube. You can go and find part 1 and part 2 of the series. So you can just have a full picture of, everything that you need to be a informed and engaged voter, okay? And not just voter, but just an overall active citizen of your community, because it's all about us, just making a difference right where we are, discovering our role and making a difference right where we are. We don't have to go across the country to do this. We don't have to go across the state. We can do this work right in our communities. But again, it's going to take everyone to be involved in this, okay? So if you have any questions for me, you can contact me. You can go to the website, www.allthingscynthiayoung.com, or you can contact me on my social media platform. Cynthia Young is my personal profile. You can go to the ministry page, which is Growing in Grace. You can reach out that way. But if you have any questions about this, if you're someone that would like me to come and present this information to an organization or a group that you may have. I'm open to all of that because this is so important. And, this is what I love to do. I love to teach this information because this is information that we need. And right now, everything we see that we're experiencing in this country, in this world, we all need to be armed with as much information as possible so we can be able to make informed decisions and we can know what's going on. We don't be in the dark about what's happening because that's when decisions are made, laws are passed right under our noses when we are not paying attention, when we are distracted. And there's so much that's happening in the world today that can distract us, that is distracting us, and that will cause us to just not know what's going on. So we have to make sure we're doing our part, okay? So, yeah, this is all I have for today. Again, if you have any questions, reach out to me. If you want more information about what we shared today, get the book, Sacred Civic Action, Quick Guide to Engaging in Civic Life, okay? Y'all take care. I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.